He assumed that I was Indian. He treated me in a different way. I guess I've never even that wasn't even that bad. Like, it wasn't violent. A bit traumatic because I've not experienced that. I was speaking to my friend and he was like, yeah man, that happens like almost every day for me. Like,
because they grew up in a certain with certain circumstances in which they needed not care about the ideas of privilege. They just essentially fought for survival.
But it would be nice to also see people who don't have to speak up about it doing so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, when people have certain privilege, they don't want to give it up, and they want to pander to like the people who like oppress them and everything.
Hi everyone, I'm Apshi.
I'm Jihan.
I'm Micky.
I'm Alicia.
And welcome to the Woke Up Show. Alright, firstly, thank you guys so much for being here. Really appreciate it. So before we start this very intense, deep conversation about privilege, can you introduce yourselves? Whoever wants to go first? Always the people on the end make eye contact.
Yeah, I'm so lucky I'm in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Since I'm in the middle. Okay. My name is Jihan. I studied psychology and then I furthered on to my MBA. I'm just finished, by the way.
Woohoo, congratulations!
I work in digital marketing. That's the boring side of me. See?
Yeah.
High five. But I have a lot more like other sides that I
Have a podcast?
I had a podcast. I intend on continuing the podcast.
Yes, what's it called?
It was called 11 o'clock with Yuzu, who was my partner, and Jihan, who is me.
Is it PM or AM?
That's for you to decide.
Ooh!
Okay.
I'll go next. My name is Micky. I studied history in uni. I did the invention of race and colonial history. But currently I'm doing digital marketing as well for this mental health company. But my previous job was a researcher, and it was researching policies in Malaysia, around ASEAN as well. And it was quite focused on privilege. So I helped research this book called Dismantling Global White Privilege, which will come very useful today.
Yeah!
Oh, yeah. I'm liking what I'm hearing. I'm Alicia, and I studied and graduated with a law degree. So I'm now working in social media. I initially wanted to go into law because of social justice and more so in the field of providing accessible justice. So we're all working in like digital marketing and stuff.
Well, everybody, I feel like in 2022 to some degree works in digital something, right? You can't avoid it. So let's just dive into it. When it comes to privilege, right? What do you guys, like, what's your own personal definition of it? Wow. Silence. Anyone?
We'll let the law student go first.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, well, for me, I think privilege, firstly, is kind of inextricable from like the topic, like just the general conversation of social justice and identity politics and stuff. I guess it's just about privilege is privilege, right?
Privilege is privilege,
you know, you have certain benefits, whether like, you know, earned or not.
I think
mostly
privilege
not,
is not earned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Privilege is something you're born with. Would you guys agree?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, like, historically.
Yeah.
Because I was a history student. I think privilege was like an old French word.
Oh, really?
Well,
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
well, it came from Latin. But the Latin word meant like, you are immune from certain laws.
Okay.
Yeah.
Instead of you having an advantage. It just means you're immune from certain laws. And
I mean, it kind of applies, right?
kind of the same meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the old French word was you are above some laws. Not like you still have the law.
It still applies, but you're sort of above it.
Yeah. Like they don't have to act on it if you're caught doing something wrong about it. Right. But then like privilege, how we understand it today, came in the 80s when people really started talking about it in America. Because it became all about race and your socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
But before that, like it was always there, but it wasn't, how do I say it? Like, we are aware of it, but privilege isn't visible. And the only way to be aware of it is for it to be stripped away from you. Because then you realize what you've lost.
Yeah.
So in the 80s, as like, it was like post the civil rights movement already. A lot of black people still weren't getting, they had their rights, but it still wasn't being recognized a lot, especially like in the southern states.
Yeah.
And in came like, I think it was like third wave feminism. I remember wrong, second. It's when it mixed.
I think second wave, right? In the 80s?
I think it's third.
Is it third?
I don't want to be like
I don't know.
a professional,
Yeah.
but like it's because a lot of women who are black,
Oh, with intersectionality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
regardless if they're a woman, within the whole feminist movement, they were more disadvantaged than white women because of their race as well. And that's when the whole like discussion of privilege, how we understand it now, like kind of came into being. Before that, it was a lot more based on class.
Wow, really? I didn't know that. I didn't know like there were these initial ties to like intersectionality. I thought like, you know, it was mostly just something that we like interpreted today to mean, you know, like race and intersectionality and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, because it's always existed. So like before we even had what we considered race, we had like religion.
Yeah.
And then before we had religion, it's just any identity point. And there will always be a hierarchy within a society of what is better, right? So there's always, people understand there's a hierarchy of what certain characteristics are better than others, or what they assume is better than others. But the way we understand it, like, just, I can't even think the word right now. The power structures in the way we understand it kind of came into being in the 80s.
Wow.
Am I glad I let the history major go first?
Yeah, wow. I feel like I just got educated.
Yeah.
That was amazing. But, you know, when it comes to privilege of our own, right? How did you, that process of like sort of recognizing where you were privileged, where you weren't privileged, how did that process happen for you guys? I mean, I can go first. Like when I was I think I didn't think that much of it, which obviously shows that I have privilege, that I never had to think so much about it. But when I was, how old was I? 10, 11, we moved to like Canada. And I think before that, because I was so young and my parents really like shielded me from like any sort of like racist notions. Like they would never like be like, they just didn't put it in my mind. Like we didn't really think about race like that. Like it was very like, people are just people. If somebody did something bad to me or to us or whatever, it wasn't about race. It was just about them. But when we moved to Canada, I remember we had neighbors who were like really hated that we were living in this nice part of town and we were like an Indian family. And then my mom was like, it's racism. Like the reason why they don't like that we're here is because of our race. And so that was like, okay. It's like the first time I really thought about it. But I think because so much of my life I hadn't thought about it, it didn't like terribly affect me. It didn't make me feel so bad. I was just like, oh, okay, this is what that is. And then slowly as I got older, like, I think probably only when I went to study in America that conversation really come up for me, because I also went to like a liberal arts uni. It was super woke, super like, they had like a whole like center just for social justice. Like you can imagine like, and that's when I learned terms like intersectionality and that, it's not just about race, it's like, or gender, it's like there's so many levels to it. But I think because of the way I was brought up, like for me to like, when I had to like recognize my privilege, it didn't make me feel bad. I just was like, okay, I need to be like conscious that I have this and other people don't, or I don't have this and other people do. Yeah. What about you guys?
Well, for me, I don't know, I guess kind of becoming more familiar with like social justice and realizing that, you know, like coming into intersectional, like kind of social justice and intersectional feminism and stuff.
Were you always interested in it, or how did you kind of like kind of dive into that?
I remember like I wasn't always interested in it, maybe just by virtue of being like young and stuff. But I was actually studying for an exam, and it was a criminal law exam, and the chapter was about like rape and sexual assault and stuff. And there are these statistics about, you know, rape victims and the success rate of being able to prosecute their assaulter and everything. And obviously that made me really angry.
Do you remember the success rate?
No, I don't remember the
Yeah.
exact figure, but I think, as we know, it's
Was it just in America or like?
in the UK. It was UK.
In the UK?
Yeah. So, it was a bad.
It was low, and in Malaysia, it'd be even lower.
Yeah. So stuff like that I guess kind of opened my eyes to like the general culture of like, misogyny and victim blaming and everything. And yeah, so like my venture into social justice and stuff I wasn't like going into it being informed of my privilege. I was going into it on the basis of like being aware of how I was oppressed, like as a woman, as a girl and stuff. So yeah, the more I kind of learned about social justice and like the topic of privilege and everything, and understanding that, I do have certain privileges by being cis and like straight presenting. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Yeah, I'm just saying straight presenting because like you never know, right?
Don't assume.
Yeah, right? And being like able-bodied.
Yeah, that's something I feel like we don't think about as like being able-bodied.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do agree, like it's good to examine our privileges and stuff like that. But when I was also learning about privilege and everything, like as a, through the lens of like feminism and being like a girl, it was like more so weaponized against me or other women. Like, you hear people say, it's a privilege that you are able to exercise your like womanly rights, whereas in other countries, you would be beaten and killed for being a woman. So you should be grateful for that. And I'm like,
What kind of logic is that?
those are just human rights,
Yeah.
bro. Like,
There's a guy who said this, right?
yeah, they're always. Yeah, and it was stuff like that just kind of, I mean, I'm not saying like it made me think, like it made me reluctant to examine my privileges, but like, when you hold certain identities, the concept of privilege can be weaponized against you like that.
So yeah. What about you guys? How about you, Jihan?
I think probably my first ever interaction with the idea of privilege, but maybe not even the understanding of it, but just the idea was growing up, my parents would oftentimes point at someone who's cleaning something and say, hey, if you don't study hard, then you'll end up like them.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And at the time, I didn't understand it. And I don't think...
It's quite a common thing that parents say to children.
I think especially in Asian culture, so as to quote unquote motivate you to work harder. And I think it wasn't until very recently, maybe 5 years ago, until I actually like studied it, did I understand what privilege is, where it intersects in my life, how it affects the people around me, how hard it is to have the conversation. It's not something you can really even talk to your friends about sometimes because, if somebody is better off than someone else, that's a problem. That's a problem if you don't know how to communicate.
And if that's not hard work and earned sort of like better, being better, like if you worked really hard your whole life and we're all equal and you have more money than me, then that makes sense. But if you were just born and life was easier for you, then
Yeah, but I think if your friendships can survive that conversation, then your friendships will last forever.
It's worth having.
And I think we should be able to have these conversations with our friends, like, and we must, because like to really know me or to know each other is to know that I'm less privileged in this way and you are more, and I am more in this way and you are less. And it doesn't like, it shouldn't make. I always have this belief, and you guys can please disagree with me if you think otherwise, but I don't think being privileged is necessarily something we have to feel bad about, like, because we can't help it. Like, you just can't help it if you were born a certain race or you were born into a family that was super rich. Like, you're lucky. Like, that's just, you can't help it, but it's what you do with that. That's what kind of defines you. What about you, Micky?
I guess I feel like I've always been aware of it, but I never, at least in Malaysia, because of my status, I'm Malay.
Yeah.
Come from quite wealthy family. I never really experienced it until quite recently. the fuck is it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I don't know if I
No,
was,
you
like-
can. You can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was like not even experiencing firsthand. And second, and like
Yeah.
because of he
just made an assumption.
he assumed that I was Indian. He treated me in a different way.
Yeah.
And I guess I've never like even that wasn't even that bad. Like it wasn't violent. It was just
Yeah.
like it's a bit traumatic
Yeah.
because I've no experience there. But then like I was speaking to my friend and he was like, yeah man, that happens like almost every day for me, like or like every other day. Like this is not like that shocking. This is just something we have to get used to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like unfortunately. And like that just like in my head I was like, oh my god, have I been like blind to this whole time I've been growing up in Malaysia? And I guess that just really pushed me to try like at least be more aware.
You know, just to add on to what you were saying, so sorry to cut you off. There was this one video I watched also about privilege where they got like a bunch of people, a diverse group of people,
Yeah.
to hold hands and stand in one line.
yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
And so like you got to like visually see,
I think
and I'm understanding where you're coming from. At the same time, I understand where your friend is because that's where I am.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm glad that we're having this conversation. You know, I was very excited that we planned to talk about privilege because you guys have talked about a bunch of topics before this in the past, but privilege intersects with every aspect of our life.
Yeah.
It's also like it's a hard topic to talk about, and so that's the point of the Woke Up Show, is that we talk about the things that we're not supposed to talk about in an open way, non-judgmental. We can say something wrong, it's fine. We're just here to chat. But you're right. It's like it's taken time to kind of come to this conversation, but the fact is, in every conversation we've had, this has sort of come up. You can't avoid it.
Yeah. I relate to what you described about like your privilege and stuff. And this is something like I'm still learning about and everything because I didn't really spend much of my life here in Malaysia. So, I'm still learning about it. But
Where did you live most of your life?
Thailand.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I speak.
You speak Thai?
Yeah.
Nice.
But don't. Yeah.
I'm not gonna ask you to speak it now.
It's been lost to me.
That's so awkward, right? When you're like, I speak this language.
She saw it coming.
Don't. Yeah. But just like mainly in a Malaysian context, and like putting aside the discussions of how like Chinese people in Malaysia have also historically been kind of seen as like the other by certain races in Malaysia and stuff, that we still don't really belong, but there are certain privileges that are definitely there. And like as we know, like privilege is also based a lot around respectability and stuff. And I do feel that when people have certain privilege, they don't want to give it up, and they want to pander to like the people who like oppress them and everything. And like so like my example would be like, this has been happening for a long time, but recently there was a Twitter thread talking about it. I don't know if you saw in the news, but there was like a lady who she tried to book an Airbnb, and the host canceled
because she was Indian.
No, she was Chinese.
Oh,
but I think her partner or something was Indian. I'm not sure, but and like that brought up a lot of stuff. And like
no, because that's like a new term that I've seen, is like Chinese privilege, that somebody talked about it in Malaysia, and and I've seen like responses to it on both ends by Chinese people being like, no, this doesn't exist, and it's people like, yeah, it does exist. But like, as a Chinese person, how do you feel about
it? Definitely
that?
exists.
Yeah.
I mean, like housing is like a human right? And it's deprived from like Indian folk and like Black people here in Malaysia, and like the fact that
even like non-white immigrants.
The fact that these like landlords will ask you what race you are because they favor like Chinese people or like white people and stuff is definitely like a privilege in it. It's
like, I don't remember what the website is, but that place where you can go and find lots of roommates, a lot of it is just no Indians.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's like
they're straight up, yeah.
One thing that frustrates me is like, maybe it's something I saw like in my little bubble, but I don't see enough people, Chinese folk, who, like say something about it. I mean, like maybe online, I've just mainly seen people who are victimized by stuff like this saying something about it. And it's like,
no, but I think that's the thing that a lot of people, they don't realize about like privilege is that when you hold it, you need to use it. It's not just like, you can't, even though like, if you are like in that situation, if I was looking on a roommate, for a roommate on the website, I would be like, the fuck, and I would want to speak up about it, but it would be nice to also see people who don't have to speak up about it doing so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, we should be the ones, like, holding these landlords and everything accountable because they rely on our passiveness and everything and just being okay with true. Like, oh, well, if you're okay with me staying at your place, then...
Yeah, it's also that like nobody should click those links that say no to whatever race or whatever immigration status or whatever. Yeah. But I guess people do.
Is there no moderator that like makes sure these people don't say that?
Some of these platforms say like, we don't support discrimination and everything. Maybe it just like takes time for them to get removed.
I don't know.
But at the same time, I'm not hopeful that like anything ever happens because they are blatant about it. They will say like, and then you have all these other people in the comments that unfortunately seem like the loud majority and everything that it's not racism if you exclude someone of a certain race. It's like, what the fuck do you think it means?
The definition.
Like...
It says open a dictionary. It will say exactly that. No, but you were saying about how like the reason why it's not a moderator is so they don't really care. But it's also because I think that Indian people are like 10%, 7%, a very small percentage of the population. And even though, like, I feel like we are used as like Malay, Indian, Chinese, we're diverse, but like in reality, it's like they don't really care.
It's a marketing stunt.
It's a marketing,
It's
literally our job.
Digital marketers. But also, like, when going back to the Chinese privilege, it's also that I think a lot of the economic sector in Malaysia is owned by. The private economic sector is owned by Chinese people, and I also think that generally, like in America, and I think in Western countries, probably all of us would fall under the model minority category. But in Malaysia, do you think that Chinese people out of the minority races probably hold that?
Like a model minority.
Model minority. Do you think so?
Yeah, there's definitely a model minority mindset. But I do understand that, the concept of model minority has been weaponized against us to.
Especially with the like everything under Stop Asian Hate in America. Like obviously it's not like that concept is not true.
Yeah, I mean more so that like it was something kind of imposed on us by whiteness to kind of cause us to want to pander to like assimilate. To assimilate and everything. And like I don't know how to explain. I guess because like the whole model. I mean, nowadays it's kind of called the model minority myth because it doesn't actually exist.
What does that even mean? Yeah. It's just like you're not treated, like the cops don't treat you as badly. Like, what is that like? You know what I mean?
I think maybe it speaks more so to like whether it's like a good thing or something. I feel like it's on the tip of my tongue. I remember reading about this and like I know about it. So maybe it'll come back to me. But I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. Like, privilege in some sense, but I mean, if we're talking in like a Western context, I do think we should be careful about, using Chinese people like worldwide.
No, it doesn't apply worldwide. Especially, I felt like during the pandemic, like a lot of racism against it wasn't Asian people and not South Asian, East Asian people. Like it was really bad.
Yeah, exactly, and like.
That's a lot of when this idea of model minority was guys, come on.
Like the way I understand model minority and stuff kind of stems from like American social justice and politics and stuff like that. But it's like, that is based on pretty heavy like anti-China rhetoric where, I mean, like it's imperialist like propaganda and stuff for the most part. So I think people do need to be careful about that. Whereas like when we speak about it in like Malaysia, I do feel like, I don't know if I would call it model minority.
Yeah,
I'm
maybe
not sure. I do think like...
Maybe not the right term, but like the preferred minority. You know what I mean?
There is like, it's preferred because we like pander to like the boot on our neck to I don't know. I think certain minorities who have been like oppressed in some way, I think this is like prevalent in many minorities. They do want to like...
It's kind of like you also need to survive, you also need to make it work here. Like we all live in Malaysia, we're all trying to make it work. There's like, it's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And like, that's why I also do find like, though like it's really important to examine our privilege and to acknowledge that it exists, that privilege as like a liberal politic is limited like in use, because we focus on identity politics and like stuff like representation. Like in America, for example, when we talk about like, we have the first like, woman of color in office and everything. And it's celebrated like that when, I'm not sure there's a lot to celebrate there when you realize like we have warmongers in office that look like us and, stuff like that.
It's like, they may look like this, but what are they doing?
Yeah, they're like killing people in the Middle East. They're killing children in the Middle East. So.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Like they're using like, I don't want to say they're using whiteness, but by assimilating more to that whiteness, they're being more accepted by...
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be white. It can be the majority.
Yeah.
Because in Malaysia, like, obviously in order to get to politics, you have to pander towards Malay sentiments.
Yeah.
And what Malay people like, because...
Yeah. No, because that
Malay
is
people are
the majority. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because, like, they are the majority, and I understand, like, kind of pandering towards the majority, but it's also like, come on, like...
It's at the expense of your own people,
Yeah.
For something like representation. And like, when we talk about people in power using those kind of things to tokenize like their race and use it as like a selling point or whatever identity we're talking about, it's like it's never for like the people. Like they don't actually really speak for us. Yeah. That's like a whole other thing to get into when like we talk about
politics.
Politics and being
I feel
in power.
It's that like in order to get to that position, they've already lost everything that like sort of would make them kind of like be working with us and for us. They kind of just working for themselves,
it depends on the system of government.
Yeah.
But like in a democracy, unfortunately.
So like you were saying a little bit earlier about like checking your privilege, right? Obviously I feel like this can be very sensitive for some people. Like I've talked about it before on the show. Like I had literally got into an argument with someone once.
Oh, really?
And they were very upset with me when I...
During the show?
No, in my personal life. I won't talk about it. They don't want me to talk about it. But the asking them to check their privilege was they found it very offensive, which is actually why I was inspired to talk about this on the show, because I was just shocked that they were so offended by it. But how have you guys ever sort of been in a position where either someone's asked you to check your privilege or you kind of mentally been like, oh shit, I gotta check my privilege right now?
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, like, I can't picture the exact...
Or even if...
anything back.
Maybe it'd be a better question, be like, if somebody were to say to you, like, I think you need to check your privilege, how would you feel about that?
To me, it would depend on the context.
Yeah.
Be like, what are you asking me to check it for, I think... like it's like I said, it's good to examine your privilege, but it's like I've examined it, so now what? Are we talking about like relinquishing power, like passing the mic and everything? And
I think
I think the first step is just to accept that you have.
Yeah.
You might be aware of it.
Yeah.
But you could deny it.
Yeah. I think that is the issue. Is when they want to deny. And I also think that sometimes when people lack understanding of privilege, and it's like how we said earlier, I don't think any of us who have a bit of understanding about it would think somebody's a bad person just for having it. But I think because of the way it is perceived by people, that like when asked to check their privilege, or maybe, hey, I think that the way you're speaking now, it's like, oh, you're being very privileged, and you might not realize it, that can make them immediately feel like a bad person.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
It's like fragility. It's just, like, because people ascribe so much morality to like, like, okay, well, I have this identity, like I'm white, or like I'm a man or something.
Or like my identity is that my life was so hard, and you telling me that I'm privileged takes away from this identity that I have.
Yeah. But I think like before you come up to someone and say, yo, check your privilege.
Yeah.
You need to have a conversation.
For sure. Imagine just going out to someone, yo, check your
And then just walk away.
That's what I do.
mic drop.
Yeah. But like, because they need context. Because if you're telling them they're privileged in this certain extent for this reason, and you haven't told your side of the story
Yeah.
of how you might be underprivileged, how will they understand?
Yeah.
And like, it's not just one conversation, it has to be a recurring conversation.
Yeah.
And probably not with just one person.
Yeah.
Because the more people you speak to who are underprivileged for this reason, you'll come to realize like, okay, this is not just this person's problem, this is like a wider society problem.
Yeah.
And I've just been blind to it
it's
because
like-
I have not been within this network. Or maybe I have been in this network, but what they are worried about is something I just never cared about.
Yeah.
And you
Must be
won't-
nice.
Yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't know that unless you just speak.
Yeah.
Like that's the best thing, communication.
I think like realizing that, oh shit, I never had to think about this, that's privilege. But how would you feel if someone asked you to check your privilege? Just not in a spiteful or mean way, but
I think I was the first person to ask myself to check my privilege.
yeah.
Because when I understood it, I found it very hard to digest
Yeah.
what my privilege was, that I even had privilege to begin with,
Yeah.
you know. And it did make me feel like, oh, like, does it just mean that even though I worked this hard, that a person who had lesser opportunity or lesser resources is smarter than me or better than me? And does that mean that I don't deserve this life? Does that mean I don't deserve everything that I have accomplished?
And does it make you feel like, can it make you feel like it takes away from your hard work?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. It makes it feel like, oh, you started this game with like a bunch of hacks, you know, a bunch of hacks,
Yeah. Cheat codes.
that other people don't have. But then I started looking in the opposite direction, right? I'm like, but there are people who have better hacks than I do. You know, they were given.
They got a gaming system.
Yeah, they got the whole blueprint. It's like they probably may not even have to think of the concerns that I have. Similarly, I may not have to think of the concerns that somebody else has. And it took me a very long time to process that. It required having to look at the bigger picture. It required having to understand the macro perspective. Because without that, I don't think you can understand privilege.
Yeah.
Without understanding what capitalism is, you can't understand privilege. You know?
Yeah, and I think sometimes like when, like even I will like rant on Twitter about like, you know, this whole topic, but I'd be like, I don't hate individuals. Like it's not an individual, it is the macro situation that I hate. Like I don't hate, like, I wouldn't hate you for being Malay. Like what the hell? Like that's not your fault. Like, but I can hate that the system privileges people based on something that's out of their control.
Yeah, that's what I think privilege is. I think that's what makes it so like, you know, like dangerous and polarizing is because it's not an interpersonal issue. It has to do
it's
with,
really not.
Yeah, it's institutionalized and it's systemic and everything, which is how it affords people, like individuals of that identity, a certain privilege. Because like, if they weren't able to like enjoy the powers these like privileges offer them, I don't think we'd be like having this conversation, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
But when it comes to like intersectionality, right? You know, I realized like through a lot of conversations that because my parents, like my dad, like he was really poor when he grew up and he worked really hard. Like he worked really hard and he's given me and my sister and my mom like a super nice life that because of that socioeconomic privilege that we have, I didn't feel I can't think of the word right now, like the disadvantage of our race.
Like the weight of
the weight of the race as much because of the socioeconomic privilege. Because when you are more socioeconomically privileged, people are slightly more educated. People are just gonna, they won't maybe speak with so much stereotypes and all that. You just don't feel it.
Yeah.
So like, how did that kind of realization come for you guys? Like where like, because of this, like, but as a woman, I feel it like, okay, like you were saying with standing in the line, like I can take a step forward because of this, take a step back because of this, take another step back because of this. Like,
and you're dancing. Like, because, I mean, like, once you understand, I mean, I guess for me, it was easier to digest once I realized that, you know, like, it was a tweet. It was based on a tweet. Like,
Twitter is great, okay?
It was something like, You know, like this isn't like algebra, you know, like we don't, like one identity doesn't cross the other out. And I think it's entirely possible for these like contradicting things to exist. And yeah, like it's complicated.
But on that note, do you feel that it is possible to even abolish privilege at all? Like, even if we could change the system, if we could...
I think because of things like beauty standards and disability and things, I feel like it's really difficult because like if you fall within the beauty standard, you're privileged. You know, if you're not like super plus size, then you are privileged because of the way society views people. If you're not I just don't think that those things can be fully abolished. Or maybe can they? What do you guys think?
You get like physical privileges. Like we were born with legs. Some people weren't. We already have the privilege to walk.
Yeah.
So obviously, like you can't completely end privilege.
Yeah.
But it's about closing the gap.
Yeah.
And awareness again. Because with awareness, then you can make proper policies to actually address the issues that these disadvantaged people have.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can really abolish.
I think the biggest obstacle, like when it comes to bringing awareness with regards to privilege, is getting people to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it is not possible. Once you have had a certain amount of privilege for a while, you're not going to give it up.
Yeah.
You're not going to give it up. And I was just watching this show called The Boys.
Oh yeah.
It's so good. And there was this one scene where he says
Where is it on?
Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Anywhere, if you look hard enough, for free.
Are you going to give me your Prime login? Was that what that was?
Sure.
that sounded like a transactional, sure.
No, under communism, all those things would be free.
But
No, go ahead.
that scene went something like, the only people who say, I don't need money to be happy are the people who grew
have
up with
it,
money.
Yeah, oh
Of
my God, I hate that
course,
shit.
yeah.
And like people love to valorize suffering. It's like, look at that poor person being homeless on the street with no legs. Strength. It's like,
No, it's not.
shut
That sucks.
turn off your camera right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, think about
Don't
what you
get me
said.
started. It's like, oh, like if you're Indian, you are going to work harder to get this scholarship, and the harder you work, the stronger you get. So great, right?
Yeah. One thing about privilege is like, you know, I do feel like sometimes, I mean, like more so in the context of like the way maybe our parents would use it, where they're like, okay, you may be oppressed, but at least it's like, at least you're not suffering like in a hole or something. And that's, I think, where privilege can kind of like get pretty muddy because it forces you to have to like be grateful for what is the most basic human needs and things that should be afforded to all of us. Like, yeah. And like, I don't know, I guess because the way these power structures work, you know, like with capitalism is that they engineer like scarcity. So we have to talk about privilege and we're fighting with each other for like the scraps. And I think this is where privilege for me, like why I say it's a limited like kind of idea is because it doesn't fully encompass like things to do with socioeconomics and class issues and everything, because it's been reduced to this kind of like interpersonal thing where we're just trading like, okay, well, I'm like cis and able-bodied and stuff. And it's good to examine that, but you know.
Drawing that line is difficult. It's difficult because having gratitude, even to an extreme, is contributing to the problem.
It's so toxic. It is. And it's like, there's this like psychology thing talking about how like, it was like a post I saw on Instagram about how like, when you're forced to have to be grateful all the time, it actually doesn't increase like your happiness and well-being and everything, because you're forced to have to like, I don't know, I guess for me, like the mindset of I have to be grateful for this because it's going to be taken away from me is just wrong, you know, because we shouldn't have to feel grateful for something that should be available to all of us, like housing and, you know, being well and being able to afford things like healthcare and stuff like that.
But that's the problem. If people viewed other people as equals, then this shouldn't even be a conversation.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The problem is that there are people who inherently believe that they're superior to others.
Yeah.
And therefore, the rights that I have, that I was born with, should not be the rights that you were born with. Or the rights that I have in this country should not be the rights that you have in this country. I mean, that was the whole, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this, the whole ICERD, incident a few years back.
Oh.
They refused to sign it.
They refused to sign it
Yeah.
because it says about affirmative action, right?
Correct. They were afraid
Yeah.
of the loss
Because
of
our country has affirmative action that never ends.
Speaking of affirmative action, like, do you think it works?
I think for short periods of time it can work, but I think the way it is in Malaysia, fuck no.
What is it? What is it exactly? Like, what would that entail?
It's when the government helps a certain group. It could be racial, it could be socioeconomic, in order for them to come to where everyone else
It's
is.
like having quotas sometimes in like university, like
Yeah.
like
In Malaysia,
yeah.
So in America, it meant like they send black kids to white schools. It was like back in the 60s. And then in Malaysia, it'd be like, quotas for universities, quotas
Like,
for
certain number of
companies.
like 60, like in the university, 50% have to be Bumiputra.
Oh, okay.
Because technically, the reason why we have Bumiputra policy is because people who are Bumiputra are most like socioeconomically disadvantaged. So there needs to be space for them so that they can rise up.
I think when it comes to like people in power giving you stuff like that, I think there's like an inherent like
Agenda.
you
and
think so?
also because
Definitely.
I don't know.
Do you think it works?
No.
Not even for
It was supposed to last, what, 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, like,
It's been
yeah.
like 50 now.
like 50.
yeah. But if it were to have just lasted for 5 years, 10 years, do you think it would work then?
Not the way they implemented it. They always had an agenda from the beginning.
Yeah.
I think
In Malaysia,
that
you're
was the
talking
intention.
about,
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Malaysia is the only country in the world where the majority has affirmative action for them.
Yeah.
Not naming names or pointing fingers here. Not doing it.
Literally.
for legal
Could go to
reasons, this
jail.
is a joke.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think the idea of them giving us, I mean, like, maybe this is just my rudimentary, like, understanding about it, but the idea of them giving us these rights already denotes that, you know, rights are to be given when they are actually taken away. And, yeah, I mean, who are you?
It's the capitalist model. I have 100 100 nuggets. You know, you have one, but I'm going to give you one and say you're lucky you had that
Yeah,
one, you know?
exactly. But also the immigrant is trying to take your nugget, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Even though I have 100 nuggets here that you could just.
Yeah, and it's like, why do you have the power to be able to bestow that upon us? You know, bestow these rights on us. And I think, yeah, maybe that's where we should kind of question, like, where this power like stems from and what power actually is.
Where do you think it comes from? Like, I mean, you're the history major. How far back did it start? Or were we always just like
Power.
social animals? Yeah.
Capitalist white people.
Even like in the wild, you get
Fair point.
chimpanzees who
Yeah.
have a leader. That's already power.
But you think I mean, we exist with a little bit of thought as compared to, you know, other beings. Why have we yet to be different?
Like, different
I
in what way?
think you mean
Like,
like,
why
it's-
we fight with each other?
why
to-
we still kind of act in
Power structure.
Yeah.
Why is there still like a kind of hierarchical model?
I think it's
Because it
inherent.
benefits
Capitalism.
people. Yeah.
I mean, before capitalism, you already had power.
Yeah.
Even communism had power. There's always the leader. Any social system with humans in it is
that's
going to
a
have
thing.
power.
That's a whole thing to get into. Like, that's something I'm kind of exploring myself, you know, like when we talk about like abolishing capitalism, which I am totally for. But like, you know, like when we talk about the alternatives and stuff, like for example, anarchism and how I am still a baby leftist. So maybe these questions have been answered before, but yeah, like we talk about anarchism, which is when, you know, we abolish hierarchy and it's like a vertical,
Like a-
right?
yeah.
Verticals this way.
I mean, it's not even left. It's like out of the political spectrum.
Yeah, but like that also raises the question, like, how would we just abolish power? But also, I guess we should be asking to like what degree we're abolishing power. I don't think we can. I don't know. Maybe
You
we'll never
can't.
get there.
But
I think-
it comes with
yeah.
accountability.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, you know, when we start getting into the meat of like abolishing like the state, you know, like the state as a structure of power and everything, and like how would we actually do that, and like
And what
who would be
replaces it?
replacing?
Yeah.
It needs to be organized, and in order
Yeah.
for an
Yeah, like
organization,
that's
you
the
need
thing going
power
on the
structure.
left, like on the left right now, you know, because it's
Yeah,
like,
it's like we abolishing this seem like, could be the move, but what do we do? What's the next? What's the second step?
Correct. I think like that is the end goal. I mean, wanting to abolish the structure, but how do you think we can approach like taking small steps, moving in that direction? Because there's no way we're gonna win this overnight.
Even liberals are right wing.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of where like their policies now, like maybe 50 years before, no. But in the West, everything has already shifted to the right.
Yeah.
So even if you call someone, if you identify as a socialist in America, they already see you as like a demon.
Yeah.
Let alone in Malaysia.
But Malaysia kind of semi-runs in a bit of a social...
No.
Is that so?
Isn't it just super conservative?
Literally the way we learn about like the communist insurgency in the 50s, right?
Okay, true.
They're seen as like the Chinese devil.
Correct.
Yeah.
There were Malays part of that as well.
PKM.
There were Indians part of that as well. Like, if anything, that was also one Malaysia as well. Like all races, and it was based on.
Yeah. Don't worry. We
Am I allowed to
just
talk about
keep going.
Keep going.
revisionist history? But yeah, like I think socialism was so vilified then that the whole Malaysian political system is just consistently at least center right. We will never be able to go to the left.
You don't think Malaysia's political system will ever be able to go left?
No, they can talk about it, but in practice, no.
But I think they also need to remove...
Okay, I don't know. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Okay.
I think power can buy you consent.
As well.
Yeah.
And money.
Yeah, I
Money
mean,
can buy you power.
Money can buy you power.
Snapball's on, baby.
But with the Bumiputra system in Malaysia, right? What do you think is like? Obviously, it's not working, right? Because I mean, I do think that it's not a weighted system that they're using, because I do think like because the reason why it keeps getting renewed every 10 years is because they keep saying that the Malay people, the Bumiputra people, are the ones that are most
But
impoverished.
Bumiputra is not just Malay. You
Yeah,
get the
it
Orang
is-
Asli as
yeah,
well.
Orang Asli
And like,
Even within the Bumiputra, right, there are like different levels of Bumiputra like rights. Bumi privileges, right? Like
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I heard. I think if you're, I'm not very particularly sure about like the specifics, but if you are some type of Bumiputra, then you have like certain percentage. And if you are like a purebred Bumiputra, then you have like really good benefits or something along those lines.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because I had a friend who is half Portuguese, who lives here around here, and she's Bumi, but her rights are significantly not as up there as the Malay Bumiputras.
it's because she's half Bumi.
Is that why?
No, I'm asking. It is why, but like, it's a rhetorical question.
I think because there is a specifically designated type of Bumiputra, trait or right that are designated to the Portuguese settlement people.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know if the same goes for like.
So the
Sabahan.
Portuguese Bumiputra are different than the Malay
Bumiputra.
Muslim or Orang Asli Bumiputra.
Yeah.
But even Orang Asli Bumiputra, like, you don't see a lot of them going to university simply based on the fact that Bumiputra, right? Whereas a lot of Malays are are able to like have that privilege.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, there's a lot I can say about Bumiputra, but as a Bumiputra myself,
Yeah.
I find a lot of conflict, obviously, because I'm only able to get to my understanding of it because I privileged from it. I was able to study abroad because my family benefited from having a Bumiputra status, and were able to do we're able to do well, at least in the 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
But then, like, just studying it myself, like, I come in a lot of conflict, obviously, because there's a lot of things I hate about it, which I like have myself.
Yeah. You can't do anything about it, can you?
No, I can do something about it. I can talk about it. It's just
Yeah.
and make others who are benefiting from it aware of it.
Have you had like this type of conversations with your parents?
Yeah.
Is it hard?
Initially, but they got to the point where they're like, oh, he's the woke one. He'll just like keep talking about this kind of shit.
Yeah.
Do you guys have these kind of conversations with your parents about privilege?
Every once in a while, but not really.
Yeah.
I don't think they really want to understand it that deep, but they do acknowledge the presence of
But
privilege.
also, like, I guess I mean, you are an Indian man living in Malaysia. Like, did they kind of like tell you like you have to be careful?
Not as much. I think growing up more like my mom and dad were like, make sure you respect girls and women.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think some of like our parents or maybe like the older generation kind of assure themselves like maybe just out of survival that if you can act the right way, you can avoid like some of the consequences of this stuff. So they don't actually like examine like the topic of privilege and how some of this stuff is out of our hands.
Yeah.
Which is really sad. So yeah.
What about you? Have you had these conversations surrounding privilege with your parents?
Yeah. But growing up, well, it was mostly to do with like finances. As far as like race and stuff, that wasn't really a thing for me because, you know, we didn't grow up with other Malaysians and everything. But I think that's a privilege in and of itself, that, you know, like some people like to be colorblind and whatever, and it's just not on their radar to examine like having to talk about this kind of stuff. I mean, like with my parents, we didn't discuss like how I have privilege or how we have privilege and how we don't have privilege. It was just something I had to find out for myself the hard way. Yeah, so no.
I think with me, especially because I think my dad like grew up really poor and all of that like my parents always were like, you're very lucky. Not everybody is this lucky. You need to know that you're lucky. And they didn't talk so much about race. Like that was not, but I think like now when I got older, like I was telling them like, you know, we've seen, I don't know if you'll have to cut this out. Like we've said that so many times, but with the like I would be getting so upset. My parents like, this is just how it is. This is how it's been. Like you need to, this is how it is. And I was like, this is just not okay. Like they like at the end of the day, like I think like as a woman, like that is a privilege that I have that like in that kind of situation, more likely than not, I would be okay. But you know, you think about your friends and your family and everybody that you know, and you're like,
it could be any of them.
It could be any of them. And they're not going to ask you, they ask you how rich you are, whether you what job you have, whether you went to, they're just going to see you for your race and your gender, and like that's it. And then my parents are like, we can work to make it better, but that's the reality. And my dad's like, that's the reality that we've lived with for so long. And I was just like, well, that fucking sucks.
I think it's exactly that. Sorry.
It's okay.
I think it's exactly the reason that they are is because they grew up in a certain with certain circumstances in which they needed not care about the ideas of privilege. They just essentially fought for survival.
They were fighting for survival.
That's what I'm saying myself. Like to be able to even think about it is a privilege. Because we have the time to,
correct,
and the resources.
I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation comes with a certain amount of privilege. I also do think it is the best way to exercise the privilege, the fact that we are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me to my next question, maybe, probably my last question, is that how do we use our privilege in the right way? You know, what do you guys think? Like you're saying, having a show like this and being able to do this with my job, like that's fucking privileged, and I know, and I'm very aware, but I think I'm like, okay, how can I use what I got in like the best way, or in a way that like with my skills, and to have these conversations, make things a little bit more open and all of that. But what do you guys think?
It's a loaded question.
It's a hard question. It's a hard question, I know.
I think it's not necessarily easy to constantly be conscious of your privilege, and oftentimes you need a break, and oftentimes being able to take that break comes with privilege too. And you see how tiring it can be. Like it's like a never-ending cycle. Never-ending cycle, and perhaps the best way that we can exercise, I wouldn't say exercise, how do I word this? The best way we can acknowledge our privilege is by helping others understand, talking more about it, talking as much about it as we can. Simply by being ourselves.
There's power in talking about things, more than people know, I think.
But I think it's important to understand that you shouldn't use your privilege to speak on behalf of someone else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like you see it a lot in America.
And it's demeaning, honestly.
All these white people trying to push the whole
I
Black Lives
love that we
movement
know that. I love that. Like,
for themselves without
So
experiencing
get it.
any of it themselves. Like, you're supposed to give the platform to the people who need to be acknowledged or want to be acknowledged. Don't steal the light for yourself just for like your ego.
That's why like privilege, like the way it's used sometimes, like a lot of the times where like in the example you just said is like an exercise in like, it's like navel gazing and self-flagellation and stuff. And even those like certain, I'll say white people. Yeah, I'm just gonna say white
You
people.
can say white people,
Fuck 'em.
that's fine. That we don't need to cut.
Like the Caucasians.
The YTs. Wait, yeah. I almost forgot what I was about to say. Wait, yeah. Like, even though, you know, they examine their privilege and they acknowledge it and stuff, and they probably come in good faith and everything, that, yeah, I don't know. I guess the way they use it sometimes is a little bit, it's just obnoxious. Like, you know, sometimes it can veer into like humble bragging and stuff where you list down all your privileges and how like you get it, like, you know, you're a good white or whatever. I mean, same with like some like.
Have you seen the show called Atlanta?
No, but I feel like I should.
Yeah.
Oh, with the Childish Gambino?
Yeah, Donald Glover. So there's like one scene where they're at a party, and then this white girl comes up to him. And it's like, oh, like, do you have weed? And then she didn't. That's all she said. And then this white guy sitting next to him. It's like, oh, you really said that because he's black, right?
I know white people like that.
And then he'd turn around and he'd tell like other white people like, this girl's racist because he asked that guy for weed because he's black. And then it suddenly became like whole Chinese whispers amongst like, I didn't even know he used the word Chinese whispers, but like it suddenly became like
Excuse me?
sorry. Suddenly it became like distorted.
I didn't even think about it.
But that's like loaded as well. But anyway, it became
Everything is
it became distorted, and then suddenly it became like this whole bunch of white people saying like, oh no, that white girl said this guy's the N-word and like that she hates him.
Settle down.
Suddenly there's a white mob and they're all beating up this white lady.
Yes.
Because they all want to feel good that they're like trying to fight racism. Or, like,
Honestly, what you described is actually something really prevalent on like online culture nowadays, and like I don't think we should just limit it to like, oh, it's just something that happens in the United States and everything, but there is like I mean, that's a whole other topic, like the topic of cancel culture and stuff. And, you know, whether you believe it's real or not, like there is an actual problem with like certain, and I feel like I don't even want to say morally righteous because it's such like a dog whistle used by the right and everything. But like these like cosplaying fucking activists who, you know, want to like charge forth on behalf of the minorities who end up trying to cancel like people of color, you know, like in their,
because they're not doing enough, they're not saying enough.
No, it's like, it's funny because like these white people, as an example, these white people who are like, you know, like woke and whatever, trying to call out fellow white people for being racist because they learned what racism is. And then they end up also canceling like people of color and like bullying them because like, you know, like just the weaponization of social justice and stuff to make themselves feel better. And like they're part of this, like they're leading the conversation and everything to do this sort of nonsense because like, I don't know, what I'm trying to say is like, it really speaks to like the lack of awareness, self-awareness in some of these people of privileged identities that, you know, social justice is now used as like tokenization is a big thing now. And I don't think enough people are kind of being critical of that because if you use the right buzzwords where you come off woke, you can get away with any kind of behavior in the name of like social justice and stuff. And it's like, aren't you white? You know,
And
like
I also feel like there are certain conversations where there isn't a need for certain voices. And I think knowing and recognizing that, I remember I was at dinner with a few of my friends and one of their boyfriends is white. I don't know what we were talking about. We were talking about something and then we were like, so what's your opinion? And he was like, as a straight white male, I don't think I need to have an opinion on this. And we were like,
as he should.
very good.
Correct answer.
Correct answer, exactly.
it's the least you could do. Just
Don't need to thank me.
So it was just nice. Like, you know, we don't need to
But that's
put
the thing, like,
ourselves.
they're getting congratulated on not speaking.
Yeah.
Why is there something like congratulate?
He shut up for once.
Finally, he's like not using his privilege. Like,
Thank God for
what a
that.
relief.
No, but literally, I mean, like the times I found myself being like, oh my God, he thinks women have the right to their own bodies. Like, yeah, it's just
Right to their own what?
to their own bodies.
Oh, body. I thought you
Yeah.
said potties. I was like, wait, what?
That as well, yeah.
The state of the world right now. Yeah.
All right. Well, any last thoughts?
I think when like, oh no, you go first.
Go ahead.
No, I've had the privilege to speak too much.
You
You should go first.
Here we go again.
Honestly, I feel like what I love about social justice in this part of the world is like we can say shit like that satirically, where we're making fun of people who, you know, like I don't want to say overuse, but you know, like navel gaze and self-flagellate, and
What does that term mean, navel gaze?
it's like you. How do I explain it? I feel like you would know how to explain it, probably. It's like basically when you. I was gonna say like you toot your own horn a little bit when speaking about certain issues and center yourself, I guess. Like
becomes about you
Yeah.
rather than the problem.
Okay.
people do that so often, like privileged people and everything. What were we talking about?
We were talking about final thoughts.
So
Yeah.
you was about how in Asia we were joking and it was satirical.
Oh yeah. Like yeah, that's what I love, that we can talk about this kind of stuff satirically, and you know, like whereas in the West, like white people will be like,
It's
"No,
very
I don't think I should
serious.
say
I
that."
feel
Yeah.
like we should still be able to laugh. We should still be able
Yeah.
to talk about it. Like, if we make it such a like tight, hard conversation, people are gonna feel so afraid to talk about it. But we can make mistakes, and you can say something wrong, and I can forgive you. And even with a friend of mine, she said something to friends of so many years, and then I told her, I was like, you know what, that was kind of racist. And then she was just like, oh shit, I'm sorry. And I was like, it's not okay, but I forgive you.
Yeah.
And it's okay. We can. You can make a mistake, and we can give
You're
people
always
space.
gonna make a mistake,
Yeah.
and that's
Perfect.
another thing that I have a critique with. Like when it comes to, you know, like some people who just ventured into social justice and they're talking about their privilege and whatever, is like they're so scared to mess up that they think themselves above these mistakes. When it's like come on, you know,
We
have some
all-
humility.
yeah.
Like we're all gonna make mistakes, and yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that. But like,
I think you're right. I think growing up and understanding my privilege and, oh my God, is this what navel gazing is?
I don't think so. I don't think so. This is a safe
Finish your
space.
sentence.
We're talking about privilege and I realize I'm talking about myself. It's like,
That's
she's
okay.
right.
That's okay.
Yeah, but that's like relating to it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you're not like, you know.
You know, like
Okay.
I
Like,
just
you know
I
when white
recognize
people-
my privilege so much, and I'm
Yeah.
just here fighting for the cause.
Yeah.
No,
when
lah.
white people are like, you know, like, oh my God, you're so oppressed. And I'm just, you know, shit like that. Cut that out.
Go on.
No, you're not navel gazing.
I think the way I learn is I retrospect and I observe the way I interact with my environment, and that's why I tend to talk about my experiences a lot. So I hope that's okay.
Of course. I mean, I think the big
course.
distinction is, I think this is important for me to note, but like when it comes to examining privilege and whatever, is like you can do it in a self-victimizing way where it's self-pity and everything. You know, and it's like, I don't really want to hear about how sad you are because women, you know, like that meme about like that hot guy, like a muscly guy taking a selfie and he's like just contemplating about women's rights in Afghanistan, stuff like that.
Oh my god.
Yeah, but no.
Is that you?
No, I hope not. I don't want to scroll down my IG profile and find that. Yeah. But I think the best way to acknowledge privilege, to answer your previous question, these are just my final thoughts.
Yeah, last
yeah.
few thoughts.
Yeah. So even as I was growing up, I made mistakes in the past, like not knowing certain things and even saying certain things as children, you know. And there was no one to teach me, no one to guide me, no place to learn. And over time, I did learn. Over time, I had the exposure, I had the privilege to learn what was wrong and what was right. And I think the best way for us to acknowledge privilege, I can see bits of my t-shirt is flying.
Get it.
The best way to acknowledge our privilege is to be ourselves. To be ourselves in a humble way, because different people have different concoctions of privilege. You know, there's so many intersections. It's so deep. It's so many ins and outs. And the best way to help each other is to be ourselves with each other and help each other understand our role, our place in society and on this planet. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah,
No,
I think
definitely.
that was lovely.
I think like what we've taken too much from years of like Western influence and colonization is the idea of individualism, but not within, because in the West at least it's about my personal freedom. Traditionally what we have in Asia, and not even in Asia, in Africa and non-Western societies, is we are a community. We're a whole like society and we have to work together. And privilege really comes when you see like, no, I'm different from everyone else. And like, kind of on a finishing note, in order to address that, we can't use equality. We have to use equity. Because equality will never exist.
Yeah.
Because of the privileges that have led up to where we are now. You need equity in the sense that different people will need different resources to help them get to where they are. Not everyone can start with the same resources.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Everything you both said was really on point. And, you know, just tying it together by saying, yes, it's important to examine our privilege and, you know, just be aware of that. But I also think it's important to understand, like, it shouldn't stop there and be careful. I think it's important to be careful about it, that your, you know, performative gesture of just, okay, I recognize my privilege now, doesn't segue into like tokenization and co-optation and like identitarianism, where you reduce and essentialize like certain identities, that it like just kind of loopholes back into being dehumanizing, which I think is kind of a bit of a problem. I think it's possible to listen to minorities and people of like oppressed identities without dehumanizing them further. Yeah, just don't be performative. Don't be like those white people.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think just take time to think about it and talk about it, and feel free to make mistakes and learn from it, and just be open-minded. I think that with these conversations we can be very defensive, and I think if you just try and put that away and just kind of listen and like we said earlier, you know, find the conversations where you also don't belong in, and know when to take a step back and know when you are needed, and slowly try and figure that out. Nobody expects you to know everything. I don't think any of us know everything at this point. But thank you guys so much. This was obviously like a heavy subject, but I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun indeed. And for those watching at home, like, share, comment, subscribe, and stay safe and stay woke. Bye!
Bye.